They say that blood is thicker than water, but nobody ever talks about the toxic sludge that can pool beneath the surface of that bond until you're already drowning in it. How much of your own identity are you supposed to sacrifice before it stops being called being a good daughter and starts being called a hostage situation? And at what point does the person who gave you life become the exact person who makes you wish you hadn't been born at all? I've spent the better part of 8 years living in a war zone where the mines were hidden in casual conversation and the artillery fire was my mother's voice raised in a screech. You don't realize you're living in a cage until the door is suddenly left unlocked and you find yourself too terrified to even reach for the handle. I'm standing at that threshold right now, heart pounding, hand hovering, wondering if I should walk out into the sunlight or lock myself back in for the sake of a memory of a woman who hasn't truly existed in years. It all started, as these things so often do, with a tragedy. 8 years ago, my stepdad passed away. He wasn't just a parental figure, he was the glue that held our home together. When he died, it didn't just break my mother, it shattered her, and in the process, she decided that I was the only piece of her life left that could be salvaged. She didn't look for a counsellor, a support group, or even a hobby to fill the void. Instead, she looked at me and decided I was to be her companion, her therapist, her punching bag, and her sole reason for waking up in the morning. I was young, I was hurting, and I was desperate to keep my family intact. So, I did the right thing. I moved back into her house. I thought I was being a hero, a saviour stepping in to make sure she was safe, fed, and loved. But I quickly realised that by moving in, I hadn't become a roommate. I had become a possession. The grief that should have been shared became a contest. If I dared to cry, if I mentioned how much I missed my stepdad, the air in the room would shift instantly. She would shut down, her eyes narrowing, her posture stiffening until the room felt like it was freezing over. She'd tell me that my grief was nothing compared to hers, that I didn't know the meaning of true loss. It was like I was auditioning for the lead role in a tragedy I never asked to star in, and every time I cried, she penalised me for stealing the spotlight. I never got to grieve properly. Every tear I shed had to be hidden under a pillow, every sob stifled with the edge of a blanket, because if she heard me, she would storm into my room, not to comfort me, but to tell me how selfish I was for having feelings of my own. I was walking on eggshells for 8 years, afraid that a sneeze might set her off, terrified that a simple, "I'm tired," would turn into a 2-hour lecture on how I was abandoning her. But it wasn't just the house. It was the world outside. Whenever I tried to reclaim my own life, when I started dating, when I tried to have a social life, or even when I just wanted to go to a movie with a friend, she treated it like a personal act of betrayal. I remember the first time I dared to mention a guy I was interested in. I was so excited, glowing with that nervous, butterflies in the stomach energy that usually comes with a new relationship. I wanted to share it with her because, at the time, I still harboured this naive hope that she could be my mum again, that she could be happy for me, that she could be the person I could tell anything to. I sat down at the kitchen table, the air thick with the smell of her bitter coffee, and I let it slip. I mentioned his name. I mentioned that he was kind, that he made me laugh. I expected a smile. Instead, the mug hit the granite countertop with a sound like a gunshot. The screaming started before the coffee had even stopped sloshing over the rim. She didn't just disagree with me dating. She acted as if I had walked up to her and slapped her across the face. She started sobbing, not the quiet, dignified kind, but the hysterical, throat-tearing kind that makes your chest ache. She paced the kitchen, wringing her hands, shouting about how she had absolutely no one in this world. She called me an ungrateful brat, a snake in the grass, a daughter who hated her. She told me to eat shit and die. I stood there, paralysed, watching the woman who raised me turn into a stranger, fueled by pure, unadulterated venom. I wasn't allowed to have a life outside of her orbit. If I was happy, it was a crime against her misery. If I was busy, it was a deliberate attempt to isolate her. Every single milestone of my adulthood, finding a job, making new friends, going on a date, was treated like a personal affront, as if I were a servant who had dared to take an unauthorized lunch break. The irony, of course, was that she would inevitably settle down, maybe an hour or two later, and act as if nothing had happened. There were never apologies. Not once in 8 years did I hear the words, "I'm sorry," or "I shouldn't have said that." Instead, she'd offer these hollow, infuriating phrases. "Thanks for putting up with me," she'd mumble, as if that somehow absolved her of the verbal abuse she'd just rained down on my head. It was a tactical concession, a way to keep me under her thumb without ever having to acknowledge my humanity. I eventually moved out, and for a while I thought the distance would fix it. I thought that by putting miles between us, I could create a healthy boundary. I met the man I'm with now, the man I'm currently building a life with. He is, in every sense of the word, my sanctuary. He's patient, he's steady, and he sees me, not as a servant, not as an emotional crutch, but as a person. But my mother? She treated my new relationship like a declaration of war. When I finally worked up the courage to tell her that I was meeting his parents, she didn't just get upset. She went nuclear. She screamed at me over the phone, demanding to know why I hadn't made him meet her first. Why did I prioritize them? Why was I hiding her? It didn't matter that I had been an adult for years, that I lived in my own home, or that my life was my own to curate. In her mind, I was still her extension, and every choice I made that didn't revolve around her comfort was a betrayal that warranted an emotional execution. And the texts. God, the texts. If I didn't respond within 5 minutes of her message notification pinging on my phone, the barrage would start. It would begin with a single aggressive question mark, then a comment about how I was too busy for my own mother. By the 10-minute mark, I'd be getting paragraphs of vitriol, insults about my character, accusations that I was abandoning her to rot alone in her house. I'd be at work, trying to focus, and my phone would be vibrating uncontrollably against the desk. My heart would start to hammer against my ribs, that familiar, sickening feeling of panic rising in my throat. I'd be sweating, hands shaking, trying to craft the perfect neutral response just to get her to stop. It was like trying to defuse a bomb, and I was the one holding the wire cutters, knowing that one wrong move meant I'd be labelled the villain for the rest of the week. The breaking point didn't come with a bang, but with a hollow, suffocating silence. It happened on a Tuesday of all days. I was at my partner's place, finally feeling a semblance of peace, a rare commodity in my world. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, then again, and again. I didn't even have to look at the screen to know what it was. I could feel the energy of the room shifting, the anxiety coiling in my gut like a serpent. She was at it again. She had decided that my absence from the phone for an hour was a moral failing. The text was scrolling by in a blur of blue bubbles, each one more venomous than the last. "Are you ignoring me? I guess your new life is just too important for your own mother. I hope you realize how alone you'll be when everyone sees who you really are." I stared at the phone, and for the first time in 8 years, I didn't feel the impulse to apologize. I didn't feel the need to scramble, to explain that I was simply existing in the real world, to promise that I loved her, or to beg for her forgiveness for the crime of breathing. My finger hovered over the screen, and I realized with a chilling, crystalline clarity that I was done. I was done debasing myself. I was done watering down my own joy so that she wouldn't feel overshadowed. I was done being the emotional trash can for her unprocessed, weaponized grief. I set the phone face down on the table. The vibrations continued for a few minutes, a frantic, rhythmic buzzing that sounded less like a notification and more like a dying heartbeat. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I didn't block her then, but I stopped responding. I simply stopped feeding the fire. The withdrawal was agonizing. It's strange, isn't it? Even when you know someone is hurting you, even when you know the relationship is toxic, there's a part of you, that primal childhood part, that screams in terror at the idea of cutting the cord. I felt like I was physically amputating a part of myself. I spent days waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the inevitable escalation, waiting for the guilt to swallow me whole. And the guilt did come. It was a heavy, grey blanket that settled over my shoulders, whispering that I was a terrible daughter, that I was cruel, that I should just reach out and say one nice word to make it all go away. But I didn't. I held the line. I finally managed to convince her to go to therapy, which felt like a massive victory at the time. I thought, okay, this is it. This is the bridge back to a healthy relationship. A professional is going to sit us down, help us unpack this, and teach us how to be mother and daughter again without the trauma. I was so incredibly wrong. The sessions were an absolute disaster. I arrived with hope. She arrived with a list of grievances. She didn't want a therapist. She wanted an audience for her performance. The first session was essentially her standing on a soapbox, weeping and screaming about my abandonment and my coldness, while I sat there, stunned and silent, trying to get a word in edgewise. The therapist barely managed to interject before the clock ran out. The second session was a carbon copy. I tried, I really did. I tried to explain that I loved her, but that I needed space, that her volatility was destroying my mental health, that I couldn't be her everything. But the second I started to speak, her eyes would glaze over, and she would interrupt, louder, sharper, more vicious. It wasn't a conversation, it was a siege. After those 2 sessions, she declared that she was done. Not because it wasn't working, but because she didn't get what she wanted. An unconditional surrender. She told me point blank, if she couldn't have unfettered 24/7 access to me, if I wasn't going to be available at her beck and call, regardless of my GD, life, my job, or my partner, then she wasn't interested in a relationship. She basically gave me an ultimatum. It was me, on her terms, GDK, and that brings me to the terrifying reality I'm facing today. I want her in my life. I truly, deeply do. She's my mother. But looking at the cold, hard facts, I have to ask myself, is a relationship even possible with someone who refuses to see me as a separate human being? The silence from her end hasn't been peaceful. It's been a vacuum. I still have her calls and texts silenced, a constant glowing reminder sitting in my inbox of a life I'm trying to escape but haven't quite managed to bury. Every time I see that little red badge on my phone, my stomach turns over, half expecting a tirade, half dreading the potential for her to finally say something that sounds like an actual human connection. But it never comes. It's always the same: accusations, demands, and the crushing weight of her expectations. I've reached out to a few family members, people I thought would understand, people who have seen her spirals before. I felt like I needed an anchor, some sort of validation that I wasn't losing my mind. But the response I got was almost worse than the abuse itself. "She's your mum," they say, their voices dropping into that patronising, pitying tone that makes my skin crawl. "You just need to work it out. You're all she has. Blood is thicker than water." It's the standard script for people who don't have to live in the trenches. They see the mother-child dynamic through a lens of societal expectation, not the reality of psychological warfare. They don't see the panic attacks in the break room at work. They don't see the way I jump when my phone buzzes, or how I've had to train my partner to be patient when I suddenly go quiet and withdrawn because a memory of her screaming triggers a freeze response. They tell me to be the bigger person. They tell me to be patient, but how much bigger can a person get before they simply disappear? I've spent 8 years shrinking myself to fit into the hollow space she carved out for me, and I'm tired of being small. I'm tired of feeling like a side character in a story about her grief, a story that never ends and never changes. I've been doing a lot of thinking about what a relationship actually means. We use that word so loosely, don't we? A relationship is supposed to be a partnership, a two-way street where respect flows in both directions. If one person is the road and the other is a steamroller, that's not a relationship. That's a demolition project. I look at my partner, at the way he holds my hand when I'm having one of my bad days, the way he doesn't take my silence as a personal attack, but as a need for support. He's shown me what love looks like when it isn't weaponized. It's quiet. It's patient. It's kind. It doesn't ask me to trade my autonomy for its approval. And when I compare that to what I have with my mother, the contrast is so stark it's blinding. There's this part of me that's terrified of the finality of it all. If I truly walk away, if I decide that no contact is the only way to save my sanity, am I killing the chance for her to change? Am I the one being toxic by cutting her off? I keep playing back the tapes of her screaming at me in the therapist's office, her face red and contorted, and I realised that she wasn't looking for a daughter. She was looking for an emotional mirror that would only ever reflect back the version of reality she wanted to see. I'm sitting here, writing this all out, and the realisation is hitting me harder than ever. I am not the one who broke this. I am just the one who is finally refusing to pay for the repairs. I'm starting to understand that the people who tell me to work it out are asking me to keep paying a debt I never incurred with a currency I don't have. They are asking me to sacrifice my future for her past. It's a heavy burden, the weight of a mother's unhealed wounds. But I'm beginning to see that I cannot heal her. I couldn't do it 8 years ago when I moved in, and I can't do it now from the safety of my own home. All I can do is choose which life I want to live. Do I want to live in a state of constant, high-alert anxiety, waiting for the next storm? Or do I want to be free to be a person, a partner, a friend, a woman who isn't defined by someone else's inability to cope with their own existence? I've been staring at the wall for hours now, thinking about what it would actually mean to let go. You know, we're taught that family is a fixed point, that no matter what, you're tethered. But what if that tether isn't holding you up? What if it's pulling you down into the dark water, and you're so terrified of the silence that you haven't realised you're already drowning? I remember when I first moved into my new place, I had these boxes everywhere, tape residue on my fingers, and the overwhelming, terrifying sense of freedom. For the first few days, I kept checking my phone, bracing for the inevitable text, the one that would tell me I was ungrateful for leaving, or that I had ruined her day by being absent. And when that message eventually came, a biting, cruel critique of my new furniture, of all things, it wasn't a shock. It was just a reminder. It was like living in a building with a structural defect. You know the roof is going to leak, you know the floorboards are soft, but you keep walking across them anyway, praying they'll hold just this one more time. But I'm realising that every time I work it out, I'm not fixing the foundation. I'm just painting over the mould. The mould is still there, rotting away at the wood, waiting to spread to everything else I build. My relationship with my partner, the one thing I truly cherish, is being tainted by this. Not because he's done anything, but because I'm always looking over my shoulder. I'm always carrying that phantom version of my mother with me, whispering that I don't deserve this happiness, that I should be home with her, that I am a terrible, selfish person for finding peace. I see so many people in the comments sections of stories like mine, and they always say, just block her, cut the cord, you owe her nothing. And a part of me, that rational adult part, screams, yes! But there's that other voice, the one that's been conditioned for nearly a decade, that feels a sickening twinge of disloyalty. It's the good daughter reflex. It's the voice that says, "But she's hurting. If you leave, she'll be all alone with that hurt." And then I stop and ask myself, and what about me? When I was crying in my room those 8 years ago, when she was screaming at me for wanting to have a life, when she told me to eat shit and die, who was there for me? Who was looking after my hurt? She wasn't. She was too busy using my pain as a prop for her own. I've come to realize that she doesn't actually want me. She wants a version of me that doesn't exist. She wants a doll that she can dress up in her expectations, a silent, nodding, uncomplaining version of myself that will listen to her rants without ever suggesting she get real help. And because I refuse to be that, she lashes out. It's a vicious, circular cycle, and it's one I'm currently the only person trying to break. People ask, "Why don't you just set boundaries?" And I have to laugh because that's the thing. They don't understand that for a person like my mother, a boundary isn't a rule, it's a challenge. If I say, "Mum, I can't talk right now, I'm working," she hears, "I'm ignoring you and I hate you." If I say, "I need some space for my mental health," she hears, "I'm abandoning you because you are unlovable." There is no way to communicate with someone who refuses to translate your words into anything other than an insult. I've tried the gentle approach. I've tried the firm approach. I've even tried the grey rock method, where I give her nothing to feed on. But she just gets louder, more creative with her insults, more frantic in her attempts to get a rise out of me. It's like trying to reason with a storm. You don't negotiate with a hurricane. You board up the windows and you wait for it to pass. I'm starting to wonder if the passing won't happen until I leave the house entirely. Not physically, I'm already gone, but emotionally. I'm wondering if the only way to save the relationship is to stop trying to force it to be something it simply cannot be. Does that mean I'm a bad person? Does that mean I'm failing my duty? I'm starting to think that my true duty is to the person I'm becoming, not the person she demands I remain. It's strange, isn't it? The way we cling to the idea of a parent-child relationship like it's a sacred, indestructible diamond. We are taught from birth that parents are the harbour. They are the safe place where the world stops its spinning for a moment so you can catch your breath. But for me, that harbour was turned into a war zone, and I've been trying to anchor my ship in a storm that never ends. I keep looking for the lighthouse, but all I find are jagged rocks and a siren's call designed to lure me back into the wreck. Lately, I've been asking myself, what would happen if I just stopped? What would happen if I didn't just mute the notifications, but actually turned them off? What if I stopped checking to see if she's left a message? The mere thought of it sends a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror through my chest. It's the fear of being that person, the daughter who walked away from her own mother. There's such a stigma attached to it, isn't there? People whisper, they judge, they make assumptions about how callous you must be to abandon a parent, especially one who is grieving. But nobody ever talks about the slow, agonizing death of a child's spirit that happens in the name of supporting a parent. I've sacrificed my 20s, my peace of mind, my potential, and my happiness on the altar of her grief. I've been her emotional hostage, told that my very existence outside of her approval is a form of betrayal. And now, I'm supposed to continue this for the rest of my life? I'm supposed to keep letting her scream at me for the crime of having a partner, a job, and a life, just because she hasn't found a way to heal herself? I look at my partner sometimes, while he's laughing at something on TV, or just sitting quietly, reading a book, and I feel this wave of profound shame wash over me. I feel like I'm bringing this dark, swirling shadow into our home every time I engage with her. I feel like I'm tainting the light he's built for us by letting her, even from a distance, reach out and claw at the walls of our sanctuary. Is that fair to him? Is that fair to me? I remember one specific night, not too long ago. I was sitting on the floor of my closet, phone in my hand, tears streaming down my face. She had sent a barrage of messages, some vicious, some guilt-tripping, some downright cruel, about how I was a disappointment because I didn't come over for dinner on a night I was clearly busy. I was shaking, literally trembling, and I couldn't even stand up to walk to the bathroom. I remember thinking, this isn't love. Love doesn't make you want to cease to exist. And yet, the next day, I found myself typing out an apology. I was apologizing for being busy. I was apologizing for having a life. I was apologizing for her feelings, as if I had somehow manufactured them in a laboratory just to spite her. It was so ingrained, so automatic, that I didn't even realize I was doing it until the text had already been sent. And then, the crushing realization hit. I was still playing the game. I was still trying to appease the unappeasable. It's a sickness, that cycle. It's a habit of self-erasure. You spend so long being told that you are the cause of someone else's unhappiness that you stop believing you have the right to be anything else. You start to see yourself through their distorted lens, as a failure, as a brat, as a selfish, ungrateful wretch who doesn't deserve the love she's somehow managed to find elsewhere. I'm starting to realize that the family members telling me to work it out are the ones who are truly out of touch. They don't have to bear the cost of this working it out. They aren't the ones being screamed at, being told to die, being made to feel like a monster for the simple act of trying to grow up. They have the luxury of distance. They see the postcard version of our relationship, not the reality of the horror movie. I don't think I can do it anymore. I don't think I can keep trying to build a bridge to a place where I'm not allowed to exist as an equal. I think I've spent enough time in the debris. I think it's time to stop looking for the apology that will never come and start accepting that she is who she is, and I have to be who I am, even if that means we're no longer connected. I'm sitting here now, the evening light stretching long and thin across the floorboards of my living room, and for the first time in 8 years, the silence doesn't feel like a threat. It feels like a choice. I've spent so long equating silence with her disapproval, equating it with the inevitable, crushing sound of a text notification or a missed call that would turn my world upside down. But tonight, it's just quiet. And in that quiet, I can finally hear myself think. I've been replaying those moments in the therapist's office, the way she would look at me, not with love, not even with frustration, but with a terrifying, hollow desperation. It was the look of someone who had consumed their own reflection and was now starving for more. I realized then, with a sinking, heavy heart, that she didn't want to hear my side of the story. She didn't want to know about my struggles, my anxiety, my dreams for the future with my partner. She wanted an echo chamber. She wanted to hear herself validated, to hear me apologize for things I hadn't done, to hear me accept the blame for her pain. But I'm not an echo. I'm a person. I have a heartbeat, a pulse, a life that has been trying so hard to bloom in the cracks of this concrete foundation she built for me. And every time I try to step out of those cracks, she tries to drag me back down, terrified that if I grow, if I reach for the sun, she'll be left in the dark. I've started thinking about the concept of grief and how she uses it like a weapon. We all lose people. We all have that ache in our chest, that phantom limb sensation of missing someone who should be there but isn't. But you don't get to hand that burden to someone else. You don't get to strap your grief to your child's back and tell them they have to carry it for you or they're a failure. That's not parenting. That's not even friendship. That's a slow-motion destruction of another human being's soul. My partner is in the other room, and I can hear him humming to himself, making dinner. It's such a simple, beautiful, mundane sound, and I realise that this is what a home is supposed to sound like. It's supposed to be a place of low stakes, of gentle interactions, of laughter and shared tasks. It shouldn't be a place where you have to brace for an explosion every time you walk through the door. It shouldn't be a place where your very existence is a political debate. I've been thinking about the family members who tell me to work it out. They see the image of a mother and daughter, a picture-perfect icon of devotion, and they want to preserve that at all costs. But they're not looking at the canvas. They're looking at the frame. They don't see the paint peeling, the rot, the way the subject of the painting has been systematically erased, replaced by a grey, indistinct figure that is meant to serve the needs of the viewer. They don't see the sacrifice. And frankly, they don't have to. It's not their life, it's mine. There's a part of me, that deep, aching, bruised part, that still wishes for a mother who would say, "I'm sorry, I was hurting, and I took it out on you. Let's start over." But that mother doesn't exist. The woman who birthed me is gone, replaced by a version of herself that is incapable of looking outside her own pain. And to keep waiting for that apology is to keep choosing my own suffering. It's to keep waiting for a ghost to wake up. I'm reaching the end of my rope, and I'm finally realizing that letting go isn't an act of cruelty. It's an act of survival. It's the final, desperate move of a person who has tried everything else. I've tried the therapy, I've tried the conversations, I've tried the boundaries, I've tried the silence, and none of it worked because the one thing required for any of it to work, a mutual willingness to change, is the one thing she is fundamentally incapable of providing. I'm not looking for an escape anymore. I'm looking for an exit. There's a difference. An escape is something you do in a panic, running away from a fire. An exit is something you choose with purpose, walking toward a life you've built for yourself. And I'm finally ready to walk through that door. The realization feels like a physical weight lifting off my chest, though it's accompanied by a sharp, lingering ache. For years, I've been holding onto a version of my mother that only exists in my memories. The woman she was before the grief, before the entitlement, before the rage. I've been mourning her for 8 years, even while she was sitting right there, alive and breathing, because the person I needed simply wasn't the person who was there. There's a strange, quiet dignity in finally admitting that. It's not about being cold or heartless, as some of my family members might want me to believe. It's about being realistic. If a building is on fire and you've spent 8 years trying to put it out with a cup of water, eventually you have to realize that the structure is a lost cause, and the only thing you're doing is risking your own life in the smoke. I'm tired of the smoke. I'm tired of the coughing, the stinging eyes, the way my lungs feel heavy every single day. I think about the people who say, "But she's your mother." What does that even mean in the face of persistent, calculated emotional destruction? Does mother give someone a lifetime pass to be a tormentor? I don't think so. I think motherhood is a role, and like any role, it comes with responsibilities, one of which is to not actively destroy the person you brought into this world. When that responsibility is discarded, when it's replaced by constant verbal abuse and the weaponization of a child's guilt, the title loses its leverage. I've been wondering if my hesitation to block her entirely, to finally, completely shut that door, is just a remnant of my conditioning. My whole life I was told that her comfort was the priority. I was told that my feelings were secondary, that my needs were an inconvenience, and that my life was really just a support system for her tragedy. When you're raised with that kind of programming, you start to believe that being good is synonymous with being submissive. And I look at the life I've built with my partner and I feel a swell of protectiveness. I want to protect the joy we have. I want to protect the peace we've cultivated. And I realize that I can't protect it if I'm still leaving a window open for her to climb through. Every time I keep that line of communication open but silenced, I'm basically saying to myself, maybe today she'll be different. But I know, deep down in my bones, that she won't be. She's not capable of it, and more importantly, she doesn't want to be. She's comfortable in her role as the martyr, and she needs me to be the villain in her play to keep the story going. I'm done. If I decide to walk away completely, there will be fallout, I know that. The family members who don't understand will judge me. They'll talk. They'll paint me as the ungrateful daughter who abandoned her grieving mother. But you know what? Let them talk. They aren't the ones who have to live with the panic attacks. They aren't the ones who have to wash the taste of bile out of their mouths after a phone call. They aren't the ones who have to navigate a relationship where love is just another word for control. This isn't about punishing her. This is about saving myself. It's about reclaiming the narrative of my own life, taking the pen out of her hand, and writing a story where I'm not constantly apologizing for existing. And if that means I'm a bad daughter in the eyes of people who don't know the full story, then so be it. I'd rather be a bad daughter who is healthy and happy than a good daughter who is slowly withering away. I'm standing here at this metaphorical doorway, and I realize the handle is much easier to turn than I thought. It just requires the willingness to accept that the past is gone, that the person I wanted her to be is a ghost, and that the only thing waiting for me on the other side of this transition is my own future. A future where I am free to be whoever I want to be without the constant screeching static of her judgment in the background. It's funny how, in the movies, there's always a grand, sweeping climax where everything is laid bare and the villain has a moment of clarity. But in real life, the ending isn't a showdown. It isn't a shouting match or a cinematic resolution where everyone finally gets it. The ending is quiet. It's the click of a button. It's the sound of a notification that doesn't arrive. It's the realization that you've been waiting for a bus that stopped running years ago, and you're standing alone at a rusted sign in the middle of a storm. I keep thinking about the what-ifs. What if I block her? What if I never hear from her again? The fear is still there, that lingering, ingrained terror that I'm committing some cardinal sin of daughterhood. But then I think about the alternative. The alternative is another year of being a punching bag, another decade of being an accessory to her grief, another lifetime of having my own milestones treated like funeral processions. I think about the life I'm building with my partner, a life defined by mutual respect, by joy, and by the absence of fear. And I realize that if I don't close this door, I'm not just hurting myself. I'm disrespecting the person I fought so hard to become. You know, people always talk about boundaries, like they're these soft, permeable suggestions. But when you're dealing with someone who views your existence as their property, a boundary has to be a wall. It has to be something solid, something you can lean against when you're tired of the pressure. And right now, I think I'm finally ready to build that wall. It's not an act of hate. That's the hardest thing for people to understand. It's an act of preservation. I'm not cutting her off because I want to hurt her. I'm cutting her off because I can no longer survive the way she uses her pain to dismantle me. She is drowning, and she's pulling me down with her, and for the longest time, I thought that was love. I thought that was what being a daughter was. You hold the hand of the person who gave you life, even as they pull you under. But I've realized that's just a slow, painful way to drown together. I'm standing at that metaphorical door now, and I'm reaching for the lock. I think back to all those times I stood in the break room at work, heart racing, hands trembling, just trying to find the words that would satisfy her. I think about all the times I sacrificed my own happiness, my own health, and my own dignity just to keep the peace. And I realized that the peace I was keeping wasn't peace at all. It was a ceasefire in a war that never actually ended. I'm done with the war. I'm done with the ammunition of her guilt and the shrapnel of her words. I'm ready to stop fighting a battle that I never volunteered for. And if that means I have to walk away into a silence that some people will call cold or cruel, then I will take that label with my head held high. Because behind that silence, for the first time in 8 years, I hear my own voice. And it's not screaming, it's not crying, it's just breathing. I'm curious though. If you were in my shoes, if you had spent years trying to be the daughter she needed, only to realize that the person you were sacrificing yourself for was never going to be the mother you deserved, what would you do? Do you think there's a point where you've given enough? Or is the expectation of loyalty at any cost something we're just destined to carry forever? I'd really love to hear what you think, because for the first time, I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking for perspective from people who see the situation for what it truly is, not what it's supposed to be. If you've ever been in a position where you had to choose your own sanity over the expectations of family, let me know in the comments. It's a lonely road, and knowing that I'm not the only one who's had to make these impossible choices would mean the world to me. And if you're interested in hearing more about how I navigate this new chapter, how I learn to build a life that is truly, finally, my own, make sure to subscribe. Sometimes, the most important story you can tell is the one where you finally decide to put yourself first. You know, in the quietest hours of the night, when the house is still and my partner is sleeping soundly beside me, I find myself playing the what-if game. It's a dangerous mental trap, really. I think about the phone resting on the bedside table. I think about the fact that her name, her digital fingerprint, is still sitting in my contact list, a dormant virus waiting to be activated. I think about what happens if I finally, truly, hit that block button. It feels like burning a bridge. It feels like the final, irrevocable act of a daughter who has given up on the one person she was biologically wired to love. But then, the memory of her face in that therapy office flashes behind my eyelids. That twisted, furious expression that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with her refusal to face the emptiness inside her own heart. And the guilt, that heavy, cold anchor of blood is thicker than water, starts to lose its grip. I've come to understand something profound. The blood people talk about isn't just about genetics. It's about the life force you pour into one another. When that flow is restricted, when it's used to drain you rather than nourish you, the bond isn't sacred anymore, it's a parasite. And I've been the host for way too long. I'm thinking about the future now. Not the one where I'm managing her moods, or apologizing for my own existence, or explaining to her why I'm not available to be her emotional dumping ground 24/7. I'm thinking about a future where I have the space to breathe. A future where I can look at a text message and not feel a spike of adrenaline so sharp it makes my hands shake. A future where I don't have to curate my own life, my own joy, or my own milestones to avoid setting off a landmine. It's going to be hard. I know that. I know there will be family gatherings where the absence of a seat at the table will be a silent accusation. I know there will be holiday cards that aren't sent and anniversaries that pass in a blur of bittersweet nostalgia. But I also know that for the first time in 8 years, I will be the one holding the steering wheel of my own life. I won't be in the passenger seat, screaming at a driver who is intentionally heading toward a cliff. People ask, "Don't you miss her?" And the answer is so complicated it almost doesn't fit into words. I miss the mother I thought I had. I miss the woman who existed before my stepdad died, the one who was capable of kindness, the one who was a lighthouse instead of a siren. But that woman died too, in a way. The version of her that's left is a shadow, a spectre that feeds on conflict because she's too afraid to face her own grief. And I can't live in a house haunted by a ghost who refuses to be laid to rest. I've realized that my job as a daughter ended a long time ago. It ended when I reached adulthood and realized that my parents were people, flawed, broken, complicated people, and not deities. And it ended even more decisively when she decided that my existence was something she could own, something she could manipulate, something she could throw into the furnace of her rage whenever she felt the world wasn't paying her enough attention. I don't want to be angry anymore. I don't want to be the daughter who screams back. I just want to be the woman who walks away. And if that makes me the villain in her version of the story, then so be it. She can write whatever narrative she wants, but she's not going to have a captive audience anymore. She's not going to have the one thing she craves most: my undivided, submissive, tortured attention. I'm standing at the edge of this decision, and for the first time, I'm not trembling. I'm standing tall. I'm looking at the life I've built, the partner who loves me without conditions, the work that fulfills me, the friends who see me for who I am. And I'm choosing that over the cycle of abuse. I'm choosing the light over the smoke. It's okay to be done. It's okay to acknowledge that you've given everything you have, and it wasn't enough. Not because you failed, but because the vessel you were pouring into had a hole in the bottom that could never be plugged by anyone else's love. I am choosing peace. I am choosing me. And for the first time in my life, I don't need anyone else's permission to do that. It's funny how the mind plays tricks on you in the final hour of a decision. I find myself standing in my living room, the late afternoon sun casting long golden shadows across the floor, and I look at my phone, the device that has dictated my mood, my heart rate, and my sense of self-worth for 8 years. It's sitting there, silent, an innocuous slab of glass and metal. It's so small, yet it's been the conduit for every explosion, every guilt trip, every sleepless night I've endured since my stepdad passed. For a long time, I viewed that phone as a lifeline. I thought that by keeping the channel open, I was being there for her, that I was fulfilling some sacred, unspoken duty to the woman who birthed me. But standing here now, looking at the stillness of the screen, I see it for what it really is. A leash. And I've been the one holding the other end, tightening it around my own throat every single time I chose to respond instead of protecting my peace. I'm thinking about the concept of the good daughter. We're socialized to believe that this role is a permanent state of being, a title you hold from birth until death. But what happens when the role is rewritten into something that requires your total annihilation? What happens when you realize that to be a good daughter, in her eyes, you have to be a non-entity? I've spent the better part of a decade trying to fit into that narrow, suffocating mold, and I'm finally coming to the realization that it was never built for me. It was built for a pedestal, and I was just the statue she expected to stand there, unmoving and silent, while she threw stones at me to deal with her own grief. There's a profound sense of loss that comes with this realization, and I'm not going to pretend it's easy. It's not just about losing a mother. It's about losing the fantasy that she could ever be the mother I needed. That's the real tragedy here. The tragedy isn't that I'm walking away. The tragedy is that she made it impossible for me to stay. She had every opportunity to grow, to heal, to seek help, but she chose to prioritize her anger, her entitlement, and her need to control me over the actual, living human being standing right in front of her. I look at my partner, and I think about the life we're building. A life that isn't built on obligation, but on genuine, uncoerced love. It's a terrifying shift, honestly, to move from a life where every interaction is a calculation. If I say this, will she explode? If I wait 10 minutes to text, will she berate me? To a life where I can just be, where I can exist without fear. It's like stepping out of a dark, cramped room into the blinding sun. At first, it hurts your eyes. At first, you want to run back into the shadows because it's all you've ever known. But then, you realize that the air is fresher here, the light is warmer, and for the first time in years, you aren't holding your breath. I've been reading through the comments of people who have been through this, and the one thing that strikes me is the recurring theme of the guilt. It's a universal language for those of us who have had to go no contact. Everyone talks about the guilt, the fear of the what if, the worry that we're the villains. But beneath that guilt, there's always a whisper of relief, a tiny, quiet, growing flame of independence. I'm starting to trust that flame. I'm starting to realize that the guilt isn't an indicator that I'm doing something wrong. It's just the phantom pain of a bond that I've finally outgrown. I think about the family members who tell me to work it out, and I realize they aren't trying to help me. They're trying to maintain their own comfort. They want the picture of the happy family to stay intact because it's easier for them to ignore the rot behind the paint. They don't have to live with the consequences of her volatility. They don't have to sacrifice their mental health to sustain her illusion. So their advice is cheap, and it's meant for them, not for me. I'm done living my life to satisfy their aesthetic of what a family should look like. I am choosing my own reality, and that reality includes the knowledge that I am not responsible for her happiness. I never was. I was responsible for my own, and I have been neglecting that responsibility for 8 years. The time for the what ifs is over. The time for the how could I is done. The time for me to start living, not for her, not for the memories, not for the expectations of distant relatives, is now. I'm finally at the point where I don't feel the need to justify this to anyone anymore. Not to her, not to the relatives, not even to myself. It's not a debate. It's not a request for permission. It's a decision. And for the first time in my life, that decision feels like a breath of clean, cold air. I'm not running away. I'm walking towards something better, something healthy, something mine. It's funny, looking back at the person I was when I first moved back into that house. That girl who thought she could be a human shield for her mother's trauma. She was so convinced that her presence, her patience, and her endless supply of love would eventually be enough to bridge the gap. I thought I was being a martyr, but really, I was just a casualty. I was trying to perform CPR on a relationship that had already suffered a fatal blow years ago. I've come to realize that some people don't want to be healed. They want to be heard. They want to be validated, and they want someone to share the burden of their misery so they don't have to carry it alone. But in my case, she didn't just want me to share the burden. She wanted me to own it. She wanted me to apologize for the fact that she was hurting, to apologize for the fact that I was alive, and to apologize for the fact that I had the audacity to seek out a life that didn't involve being a prop in her tragedy. The silence now, the one I've finally embraced, has a texture to it. It's not the heavy, suffocating silence of an impending argument. It's a wide open space. For the first time, I wake up in the morning and I don't check my phone to see if I've failed her today. I don't scan the text messages for hidden insults or veiled threats. I just wake up. I make coffee. I look out the window at the morning light. I take a breath. And for the first time in 8 years, it actually reaches the bottom of my lungs. I've had to relearn how to trust my own instincts. When you've been gaslit for as long as I have, you start to doubt everything. You doubt your own memories, you doubt your own perceptions, and you doubt your own worth. You start to think that maybe, just maybe, you were the problem. That if you had just been a little more patient, a little more available, a little more loving, she would have been the mother you dreamed of. But I'd been reading about trauma, and I've been talking to people who understand that a cycle of abuse isn't something you can talk your way out of. It's a pattern of behavior. And as long as she refuses to acknowledge her role in that cycle, as long as she views me as the enemy who abandoned her, nothing is ever going to change. And I can't live my life waiting for her to have an epiphany that she's shown me time and time again she is incapable of having. I'm finally at peace with the idea that I might never get an apology. I might never get to have that tearful, cinematic reconciliation where we hug it out and move forward. And that's okay. I'm no longer waiting for the apology to define my worth. I've realized that my worth isn't tied to her opinion of me. My worth is mine. It's inherent. It was there before she started screaming, and it's there now, in the quiet of this new life I've built. I feel like I've been a prisoner who finally walked out of a jail cell, only to spend the first few months standing just outside the gate, terrified to walk away because the prison was all I knew. But today I'm walking. I'm walking toward the future. I'm walking toward the life I've earned. And I'm not looking back, not because I'm cold, but because there's nothing left for me to see in that rearview mirror except a past that can no longer touch me. The weight of her expectations is gone. The pressure to be the good daughter has evaporated. And what's left is me, unfiltered, unburdened, and finally free. It's a terrifyingly beautiful place to be, standing in the middle of your own life, realizing that you're the only person who gets to decide how you spend your time, how you feel, and who you let into your heart. I know there will be hard days ahead. I know there will be times when the guilt creeps in like a cold draft under the door. But I'm ready for that too. I have my partner, I have my own peace, and most importantly, I have the clarity that comes from finally choosing myself. This wasn't the ending I wanted 8 years ago, but it's the ending I needed to start a real life. And honestly, I think I'm going to be just fine. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about the word closure. Everyone keeps talking about it, especially those well-meaning family members who insist that I work things out with her. They seem to think that closure is some kind of magical gift you receive at the end of a conflict, a neatly wrapped package where both parties sit down, apologize, understand each other's trauma, and walk off into the sunset. They think that if I just talk to her one more time, or if I just sit through one more screaming session, I'll find that mystical resolution. But I've learned something critical in these last few weeks of absolute intentional silence. Closure isn't something someone gives you. You don't wait for the person who hurt you to apologize so that you can finally close the chapter. If I spent my life waiting for an apology from a woman who refuses to even acknowledge that she has a pattern of toxic behavior, I'd be waiting until the day I died. Closure is something you build for yourself. It's the final period you put at the end of a sentence when you decide that the conversation is over. It's the act of closing the book, putting it on a shelf, and turning your attention to a brand new story. It's not about forgiveness, and it's not about forgetting. It's about accepting the reality of the situation exactly as it is, without the desperate, clawing hope that it might somehow be different if I just tried harder. I think about the people who say, "But she's your mother." It's become a mantra of guilt, hasn't it? As if the act of giving birth bestows a lifelong, unconditional pass for someone to abuse you, to belittle you, to drain you of your light. But I look at my own life now, at the way I wake up without a crushing weight in my chest, the way I don't flinch when my phone lights up, the way I can just be. And I realize that if being a daughter requires me to be a casualty, that I'm done with that role. It's not just about the distance, it's about the mental space. For 8 years, she lived in my head rent-free, a phantom critic who was always there to tell me I wasn't doing enough, that I wasn't being enough, that I was a disappointment. But the silence has evicted her, and in the space she left behind, I'm finally starting to hear my own thoughts, my own needs, my own desires. I'm starting to realize that the person I wanted to be was there all along, just buried under the rubble of her expectations. I'm starting to see that this choice, to walk away, to keep those boundaries in place, to refuse to engage with the drama, is the most loving thing I've ever done. Not just for me, but for my partner, for the life we're building, and even, in a strange, distant way, for her. Because as long as I was there to catch her every time she spun out of control, She never had to face the consequences of her behavior. She never had to look at herself in the mirror and ask, "Why is everyone leaving?" My enabling wasn't helping her. It was just delaying the inevitable. I'm standing in my kitchen now, making a simple meal for dinner, and there's no pressure to be anywhere else, no obligation to answer a frantic call, no hidden test of loyalty. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the sound of the wind outside, and the comfort of my own home. It's simple, it's mundane, and it's the most precious thing I've ever possessed. I've come to the conclusion that if you find yourself in a situation where you are forced to choose between your sanity and a relationship, you have to choose your sanity every single time. Because you cannot be a good partner, a good friend, or a good human being if you are being systematically hollowed out from the inside. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and for 8 years, she didn't just empty my cup, she shattered it. I'm rebuilding it now, piece by piece, and I'm choosing what I want to put in it. And her toxicity, her drama, her manipulation, those are no longer welcome. I'm finally the architect of my own life, and the house I'm building has no room for the ghosts of the past. It's a strange feeling, waking up and realizing that the world didn't end just because I drew a line in the sand. For years, I had this terrifying, subconscious belief that if I truly let go of my mother's emotional demands, if I stopped answering the frantic calls and the middle-of-the-night texts, the sky would collapse. I thought the weight of the sky was my responsibility, that if I let go, it would come crashing down on her, and I would be the one responsible for the wreckage. But the sky is still there. The sun still comes up. And more importantly, I'm still here. And for the first time, I'm actually here. In the present moment, not living in the anxiety of a future argument or the bitterness of a past insult. I've been looking at my partner, watching him work, and I feel a surge of gratitude that I can't quite put into words. He's seen me through the darkest parts of this, seen me curled up on the bathroom floor after a particularly brutal phone call, seen me struggle to piece my confidence back together after she'd spent hours trying to dismantle it. He never told me to cut her off. He never forced my hand. He just gave me the space to find my own way out of the fog. And in doing so, he gave me the best gift anyone could have. He let me choose my own boundaries. That's the thing, isn't it? Love doesn't come with a leash. Love doesn't look at you and say, "If you loved me, you'd let me destroy your peace." Love says, "I want you to be happy, even if that means you can't be everything to me." My mother never understood that. She thought love was a transaction, a series of exchanges where I gave her my autonomy and she gave me the burden of her approval. It wasn't love. It was a hostage negotiation that had been going on for nearly a decade. I think about the people who are currently where I was. Those daughters and sons who are currently sitting on the edge of their beds, staring at their phones, terrified of the next notification. I want to tell them, it's not your job to be a savior. It's not your job to be an emotional shock absorber. You were brought into this world to be your own person, to find your own joy, to build your own legacy. You aren't a tool for someone else's healing. It's been a long road, and I'm still walking it. I still have days where I wake up and feel that ghost of anxiety, that impulse to check my phone, that fear that I've done something wrong. But then I see the life I've built, the peace of my home, the safety of my relationship, the freedom of my own thoughts, and that impulse begins to fade. It's being replaced by something else. Self-respect. I'm finally starting to believe that I deserve this. Not because I earned it by suffering, but because it's my right as a human being. I deserve a life that doesn't hurt. I deserve to be surrounded by people who respect my boundaries and honor my needs. And I deserve to be free from the guilt of being the villain in someone else's story. I'm not looking for an apology anymore. I'm not looking for a win. I'm not even looking for closure in the way the world expects. I'm just living. I'm filling my days with things that bring me joy. and I'm surrounding myself with people who make me feel like I'm enough, just as I am. And that, in itself, is the most profound kind of victory. The silence isn't a weapon, it's a sanctuary. It's a place where I can finally hear the voice I've been trying to drown out for years. And that voice? It's kind, it's brave, and it's telling me, for the first time in a long time, that I'm doing just fine. I'm finally home, even if I had to leave my mother behind to find it. I've been thinking a lot about the word surrender. It's often painted in such a negative light, isn't it? Like giving up, like admitting defeat. But as I sit here, watching the rain tap against the window, a sound that used to make me jump because it reminded me of her tapping on my bedroom door, I realize that surrender is the most powerful thing I have ever done. I surrendered the need to fix her. I surrendered the hope that she would one day wake up, realize the damage she had caused, and apologize like a movie character. I surrendered the idea that I could save her from her own darkness. It's an incredible, terrifying weight that lifts when you finally let go of that baggage. You realize that you've been carrying a mountain for 8 years, thinking it was a backpack. You've been trying to climb the cliff of her grief, thinking you were the one who had to reach the summit, when all along, she was the one who was supposed to be learning how to stand. I think back to the last time I spoke to her, the way she weaponized my love against me. She had that way of looking at me, her eyes clouded with this desperate, starving look that made me feel like if I didn't give her every single piece of my attention, I was starving her. And for so long I believed that. I believed I was the sole provider of her emotional survival. What a heavy, crushing lie that was to live by. When you're in the middle of it, you don't see it as abuse. You see it as duty. You see it as being a good daughter. You see it as the price you pay for being loved. But there's a moment, a single golden moment, where the veil drops. For me, it was that afternoon in the therapy office, watching her scream at me, watching her disregard everything I was trying to say, watching her use the therapist's chair as a stage for her own drama. The fog just cleared. I saw her for exactly who she was, a woman so terrified of her own shadow that she would sacrifice her daughter to keep from facing it. And in that moment, I realized that I couldn't save her, because she didn't want to be saved. She wanted an audience. She wanted a witness to her pain, someone to affirm that she was the victim, and someone to validate her anger. As long as I was willing to provide that, she would never have to change. By leaving, by going silent, by setting that boundary, I was actually doing the most honest thing possible. I was telling her, I love you enough to stop lying to you, and I love myself enough to stop dying for you. I look at my life now, and I see the people who have stayed, the friends who check on me without demanding an essay on my whereabouts, my partner who has been my anchor through this entire transformation. These are people who love me because of who I am, not because of what I can do for them. That is the kind of love I want to fill my life with. I'm finally at a point where I don't feel the need to explain my choice to the family members who don't get it. They see a broken family and they want to glue it back together. They don't see that the pieces were already smashed into dust long before I decided to stop picking them up. They want the picture of the happy family, but they aren't willing to pay the price of admission, which, for me, was my entire soul. I'm not holding on to the past anymore. I'm not waiting for an apology. I'm not hoping for a miracle. I'm just living my life, one day at a time, and it is glorious. It's quiet, it's peaceful, and it's mine. I have found my own rhythm, and it doesn't match the frantic, jagged beat of her heart anymore. If you're reading this, and you're still in the middle of that war, if you're still trying to be the daughter or son who fixes everything, just know this: you aren't the problem. The problem is the hole in their heart. and you were never meant to fill it. You are a person, not a patch, and it is okay to put yourself down and walk away. It is okay to choose your own life. It is okay to be free. I've been thinking a lot about the word surrender. It's often painted in such a negative light, isn't it? Like giving up, like admitting defeat. But as I sit here, watching the rain tap against the window, a sound that used to make me jump because it reminded me of her tapping on my bedroom door, I realize that surrender is the most powerful thing I have ever done. I surrendered the need to fix her. I surrendered the hope that she would one day wake up, realize the damage she had caused, and apologize like a movie character. I surrendered the idea that I could save her from her own darkness. It's an incredible, terrifying weight that lifts when you finally let go of that baggage. You realize that you've been carrying a mountain for 8 years, thinking it was a backpack. You've been trying to climb the cliff of her grief, thinking you were the one who had to reach the summit, when all along, she was the one who was supposed to be learning how to stand. I think back to the last time I spoke to her, the way she weaponized my love against me. She had that way of looking at me, her eyes clouded with this desperate, starving look that made me feel like if I didn't give her every single piece of my attention, I was starving her. And for so long I believed that. I believed I was the sole provider of her emotional survival. What a heavy, crushing lie that was to live by. When you're in the middle of it, you don't see it as abuse. You see it as duty. You see it as being a good daughter. You see it as the price you pay for being loved. But there's a moment, a single golden moment, where the veil drops. For me, it was that afternoon in the therapy office, watching her scream at me, watching her disregard everything I was trying to say, watching her use the therapist's chair as a stage for her own drama. The fog just cleared. I saw her for exactly who she was, a woman so terrified of her own shadow that she would sacrifice her daughter to keep from facing it. And in that moment, I realized that I couldn't save her, because she didn't want to be saved. She wanted an audience. She wanted a witness to her pain, someone to affirm that she was the victim, and someone to validate her anger. As long as I was willing to provide that, she would never have to change. By leaving, by going silent, by setting that boundary, I was actually doing the most honest thing possible. I was telling her, I love you enough to stop lying to you, and I love myself enough to stop dying for you. I look at my life now, and I see the people who have stayed, the friends who check on me without demanding an essay on my whereabouts, my partner who has been my anchor through this entire transformation. These are people who love me because of who I am, not because of what I can do for them. That is the kind of love I want to fill my life with. I'm finally at a point where I don't feel the need to explain my choice to the family members who don't get it. They see a broken family and they want to glue it back together. They don't see that the pieces were already smashed into dust long before I decided to stop picking them up. They want the picture of the happy family, but they aren't willing to pay the price of admission, which, for me, was my entire soul. I'm not holding on to the past anymore. I'm not waiting for an apology. I'm not hoping for a miracle. I'm just living my life, one day at a time, and it is glorious. It's quiet, it's peaceful, and it's mine. I have found my own rhythm, and it doesn't match the frantic, jagged beat of her heart anymore. If you're reading this, and you're still in the middle of that war, if you're still trying to be the daughter or son who fixes everything, just know this: you aren't the problem. The problem is the hole in their heart, and you were never meant to fill it. You are a person, not a patch, and it is okay to put yourself down and walk away. It is okay to choose your own life. It is okay to be free. It's funny how, even after all this, I still have moments where the old habits try to claw their way back to the surface. I'll be grocery shopping, reaching for a specific brand of coffee I know she likes, and for a split second, a sharp pang of guilt hits my chest, a reflex, a phantom urge to buy it for her, to bring it over, to smooth things over with a small offering. I have to physically stop myself, take a deep breath, and remind myself that I don't live in that reality anymore. I'm not buying the coffee to keep the peace. I'm buying it for myself because I like the way it tastes in the morning. Those moments of reprogramming are the hardest part of the journey. You don't just walk away from 8 years of conditioning overnight. You have to actively deconstruct the architecture of your own mind. I've had to learn how to identify those intrusive thoughts, the ones that say, "You're a bad daughter," or "You're being too sensitive," and talk back to them. I have to remind myself that my desire for autonomy isn't a flaw, it's a fundamental human right. I've been reflecting on the sheer volume of energy I wasted during those 8 years. Think about it. The hours spent crafting the perfect response to a hostile text, the days lost to recovery after a visit, the weeks spent in a fog of depression after a particularly bad argument. If I had spent that energy on my career, on my passions, on my own self-discovery, who would I be today? I'll never know, and there's a part of me that mourns that lost time. But then, I look at who I am now, the woman who finally stood up for herself, and I realize that perhaps I needed to reach that point of total burnout to finally see the truth. There's a freedom in being the villain. For a long time, I was so afraid of that label. I thought that if I did what I needed to do to survive, people would see me as the cold-hearted daughter who abandoned her mum. But the truth is, I'm not the villain in this story. I'm just the person who decided to stop being the victim. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, if it forces them to confront their own enabling behavior or their own inability to set boundaries, then that's not my problem. That's theirs. My partner told me something the other day that really stuck with me. We were sitting on the porch just watching the sunset, and he said, "You know, you're finally starting to look like yourself again." I didn't realize until he said it that I had been wearing a mask for nearly a decade, a mask of forced patience, of suppressed anger, of careful, calculated kindness. I was so used to performing that I didn't even know I was doing it. But the mask is gone now. The lines around my eyes aren't from worrying anymore. They're from smiling. I want to be clear about something. This isn't a story about hate. I don't hate her. I pity her in a way. I pity the fact that she has built a life where she is so fundamentally alone because she refuses to see anyone else as a human being. I pity the fact that she will likely never know the joy of a healthy relationship because she is so convinced that control is the only way to keep people close. I wish things could have been different. I really do. But wishing doesn't change the facts, and it certainly doesn't justify my own slow destruction. I've reached a point where I can acknowledge the good memories, the ones from before my stepdad died, the ones from my childhood, without letting them be a tether to the toxicity of the present. I can hold on to the love I had for her as a child, while simultaneously accepting that I cannot have a relationship with the woman she is today. That's a form of closure too. It's the ability to hold two conflicting truths at once. I loved you, and I cannot be around you. So, where do I go from here? I keep moving forward. I keep building this life with my partner. I keep learning how to be a person who isn't defined by someone else's trauma. And every day, it gets a little easier. Every day, the guilt shrinks and the confidence grows. Every day, I realize that I was right to walk away. I want to ask all of you one more time. What would you do if you were in my shoes? If you knew that the only way to find your own life was to lose the one you'd been forced into? Would you make the trade? Because I'm here to tell you, it's not just a trade. It's a liberation. And if you're still waiting, if you're still hoping, if you're still trying to be the good one in a losing game, I hope you find the strength to realize that you are worth so much more than the role you've been assigned. You aren't a supporting character in someone else's tragedy. You are the protagonist of your own life. And sometimes, the most important act of the story is realizing when the curtain needs to close and walking off the stage into your own brilliant, unscripted future. It's funny to think about how much fear I carried in my chest for so long. This paralyzing belief that if I stopped responding to her texts, if I stopped answering the door, if I finally pulled the plug on this, I would be the one causing the catastrophe. I felt like a child holding a heavy, leaking bucket of water, terrified that the second I set it down, the basement would flood. But for weeks now, I haven't picked up the bucket. And you know what? The floor is dry. The basement isn't flooded. The world hasn't collapsed. I'm finally starting to see that her crisis was never mine to manage. The tragedy of her life, the loneliness, the bitterness, that was a house she built with her own choices, and she invited me to move in and live in the misery with her. I did it for 8 years. I stayed in the dark because I thought it was my duty to keep her company. I walked on those eggshells until my feet were raw and bleeding, always waiting for her to say, "Thank you," or "I see you," or "I love you for staying." But she never did. She couldn't. Because in her eyes, I wasn't a person. I was a mirror. I was just the place where she looked to see her own reflection, and whenever that reflection showed her someone who was aging, someone who was alone, or someone who was unhappy, she hated the mirror. She smashed it. She screamed at it. She tried to make it show her something else. And for years I sat there trying to bend and twist my own soul to give her the reflection she wanted. I think about the what-ifs that used to keep me up at night. What if she gets sick? What if she's alone? What if she has no one? And I realize now that those are just the tactics of a fear-based relationship. It's the "if you leave, you're the monster" narrative. But I'm not a monster for wanting a life. I'm a human being. I have one life, this one right here, and I am not going to spend it being a prop in her tragedy. My partner and I were out for a walk this morning, and the air was crisp, the leaves were turning, and I felt this sudden, overwhelming sense of lightness. I turned to him, and I realized I wasn't checking my phone. I wasn't braced for an argument. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was just there, in the moment, with the person who actually loves me for the flaws I have, rather than the person who hates me for the life I'm trying to live. I'm letting go of the guilt. It's a slow process, like washing ink off your hands after a long day of work, but every day it gets a little lighter. I'm starting to forgive myself for all those years I spent trying to fix something that was never broken by me in the first place. I'm starting to realize that my failure to save her was actually a success in saving myself. If there's one thing I've learned through this, it's that boundaries are not just for the other person. They aren't a weapon you use to punish them. They are a fence you build to protect your own garden. For 8 years, I let the weeds grow over everything I cared about, because I was too busy trying to keep her happy. Now, I'm pulling the weeds. I'm planting new seeds. And the garden is finally starting to bloom. I'm not looking for an ending anymore. I'm looking for a beginning. And if you're out there listening to this, and you're feeling that same weight, that same crushing, suffocating guilt for wanting your own life, know that you're not alone, and know that you are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to choose your peace over their conflict. You are allowed to be happy. I think I'm ready to stop talking about her now. I think I'm ready to stop making her the center of my story. There are so many other things I want to do with my time, so many other people I want to love, so many other adventures I want to take. The chapter is closed. The book is back on the shelf, and I'm walking out the door into a morning that finally belongs to me. It's strange how you can live in the shadow of someone else's expectations for so long that you forget what your own sunlight feels like. I spent 8 years being the keeper of her secrets, the guardian of her grief, and the target of her rage, all while convincing myself that I was being a good daughter. But the reality I've stepped into, this quiet, steady, ordinary life with my partner, has taught me that being a good daughter shouldn't mean being a ghost. I'm looking back at that time now, not with anger, but with a strange clinical clarity. I see the younger version of me, the one who walked on eggshells, the one who stifled her own tears to make space for someone else's. And I just want to reach out and hold her. I want to tell her that she wasn't a failure for not being able to fix an unfixable situation. I want to tell her that her worth was never, ever dependent on her mother's approval. I think about the people who say, blood is thicker than water, and I have to smile, because they've got it all wrong. The water of the womb is where the struggle starts, but the blood of the covenant, the bonds we choose, the partner who stands by us, the friends who respect our boundaries, the life we cultivate with our own 2 hands, that is what truly defines us. I've found my people, I've found my sanctuary, and I've found my voice. People ask me if I'm afraid of the future. I tell them no. How could I be? I've already survived the worst of it. I've already stared down the barrel of the deepest, darkest guilt I've ever felt, and I didn't break. I walked through the fire, and instead of being burned, I was forged. I am stronger, clearer, and more at peace than I ever could have been if I had stayed in that house, waiting for someone else's permission to exist. If there is one message I want to leave with anyone who is currently feeling that same suffocating pressure, that same heavy, guilt-ridden obligation to a family member who uses their pain as a weapon, it's this. You don't owe them your soul. You don't owe them your sanity. And you definitely don't owe them the right to treat you like a possession. It is your life. You have the right to curate it. You have the right to protect your peace. I'm letting go of the phone. I'm letting go of the texts, the guilt trips, and the phantom vibrations that used to make my heart race. I'm walking into the rest of my day, and then the rest of my week, and then the rest of my life, with my head held high and my heart wide open to everything that isn't a demand. I'm not a bad daughter. I'm a human being who finally chose to be whole, and that, more than anything else, is the best gift I could have ever given myself. The curtain has fallen on that long, exhausting play, and for the first time, I'm not worried about what the audience thinks. I'm just walking off the stage into the fresh, crisp air, ready to start living a story that I'm finally writing myself. I know I've asked this before, but it bears repeating. If you've ever had to walk away from a family dynamic that was slowly killing your spirit, how did it change your perspective on love and duty? I'm still learning to navigate this freedom, and your stories, your strength, and your insights are the compass I use when the path gets foggy. Share your thoughts in the comments, I read them all, and I think we can all learn a lot from one another's bravery. And if you're finding value in this journey of reclaiming one's own life, consider subscribing. We're going to be talking about a lot more than just survival here. We're going to be talking about how to thrive after the fire. The silence is beautiful, isn't it? It's not an absence of something. It's the presence of me. And for the first time in 8 years, I am exactly where I need to be.